All right. Instead of traditionally asking what we did yesterday, did anyone have a light bulb moment from yesterday? Or is this entire project week a waste, and what you're telling me is you want to start SQL today instead and just not give you a week off to catch up? I'll do it, Jen. I'm prepared.
I feel like I was grasping React when you first started, but the more and more we do it, there's so many more things that you're adding on that it just like now I'm grasping at short straws to try and understand it.
So the way that I would think about it is all of the core React concepts we covered in that quiz, right? So if you can go through that quiz and be like, all right, what am I being asked to do here? I'm either doing a link differently, or routes are a little different, or I'm creating a component. Those are all of the core concepts, right? So like everything that we're doing, the whole Star Wars API, I think if I made the quiz right, everything that we did in the Star Wars API, we covered in that quiz somewhere. The difference is that we're layering some of those concepts together, right? We're starting to build on top of that. And I think that's where the overwhelming feeling comes in. It's not always confusion, but it's just like, oh my God, there's an endless amount to learn with React. But if you take a step back and go, all right, what core concept are we using here? Why did we put this use effect in? Why are we using state? Why are we mapping over that state? Why do we set that state? All of that goes back to the quiz, right? And it's like, oh, this is just state and use effect and reusable components, or, you know, mapping over data or something like that. So I think, you know, take it with a grain of salt, because you can build any web application that you want, and you don't even need React, right? You can do that in vanilla JavaScript. But you now the trend is to do it in React or Angular or a framework like that, because it makes it a little bit easier, right, to incorporate all of that together. That be empowered by that, right? You can be like, wow, almost anything on the internet, any website that I've been to, any web application that I've used, I now have the knowledge to build it. Maybe I'm not going to go build that in 2 weeks. I'm not building that overnight, right? But you've got everything that you need to now know on the front end, and thinking like, oh, I can go build any website that I want, really, really overwhelming, because you're like, I wouldn't even know where to start with that. But you do, because you go, all right, I'm looking at whatever page I'm on. I'm not going to look at the whole page. I'm going to start at the top. What's the first thing that needs to show up, right? Okay, now there's this sidebar. How do I get that sidebar to show up? Okay, now there are multiple pages. I need a router. What's reusable here? What are those components, right? We're not expecting you to be React all-stars at the end of this. We're not like quizzing you of like, how do you think they built use state under the hood? No. We don't need to get that deep, right? It's more of, hey, I recognize that this is a tool, and this is a more efficient way to write my code, and to be able to build something and integrate data right into it. I don't know if that helps at all.
It does. It helps. It started getting overwhelming, and I felt like I lost everything that I first learned when you started React, and I was like, well, wait a second, it piles on, and it trying to remember the basics and going through all the extra stuff is kind of hard. I'm still
Yeah.
trying to get through this stupid quiz. I know I know how to do it if I just get into your, I think if I get into your repositories, I can start looking at stuff and figuring out on my own and like getting a better grasp of it.
Absolutely. And the review that we did on Tuesday, I like used the quiz to teach everything that we did on Tuesday. So if you're stuck on the quiz, go back to Tuesday's video, because that's where I like literally went step by step based off of whatever the questions were on the quiz. It was a fast review, but it should have covered most of the stuff on the quiz. Glad the review on props helped. Glad to see that you guys are starting to see some of the first steps in your project and your capstone, right? Of doing the router, getting that set up, and getting your first component set up. One of the most fun parts for me of moving a project over from vanilla HTML to React is starting to identify like, oh, this navbar I use everywhere. So I can make one navbar file and drop that in one place and have it just work, right? Or, oh, there's this card that needs to show up that's got the title and a body and a link to it. All right, how are we going to display that? How are we going to work through making a reusable component, getting the props passed in, kind of starting to map over that, starting to what we call dry out our code, right? Don't repeat yourself, starting to identify when we're moving sections over, oh, I don't actually want to move this HTML that's 400 lines over. I want to move just this one thing over, and then I can repeat that component over and over again. And then once we get into the database, which we're going to work on the Star Wars project tonight, we're going to see a little bit more about the router and how we can make it so we can click on one link and make one page and have that reusable. We saw that in the blog post a little bit. We're going to see that, or in the blog project, we're going to see a little bit more of that tonight. We're also going to cover images in React because getting your images to work are slightly different. So we'll cover images in our Star Wars project tonight. We're going to go over the router and the outlet again, just because that's kind of like a tricky concept to wrap your head around. And then tomorrow and Thursday, we're going to switch gears and go back over to our portfolio site. So you'll get the last chance at practicing moving things over from vanilla HTML to React, kind of going through that process of identifying what components are different, making sure those are all wired up. And then on Monday, we start in the database. Let me confirm that. We might do, I can't remember what we do in the schedule. Yep. Next week, we start in the database. Then weeks 18, 19, and 20, we do full stack. So that's where we start building our own APIs, learning how we can build our own server, get that up and running. Nathan comes back in for a week and a half. He gets half of week 21 and all of week 22. Week 23, we are in person for Career Week. So Laura comes in for the second to last week. That will be in the computer lab in the library. I can't remember if you guys had classes in that lab or not, maybe in the first week, maybe not. It is the second floor all the way back, the other end of the library. There is a computer lab in there. Pack both a sweater and a t-shirt because it is, I've only ever been boiling or freezing in that room, but nothing in between. And then our final week, week 24, we will be at Common Space Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. That is our final week. That is where we are either crying or putting a Band-Aid on you from either stressing out about the capstone or you just banging your head against the keyboard so much that we need to bandage you up. That last week is all about practicing your presentations. Don't worry, we'll have more information about that coming down the pipeline. And it is about getting your capstones wrapped up. So we have all hands on deck. We'll have at least 3 or 4 TAs there. I will obviously be there. That is the final push where we, get the last of the bugs worked through. Don't worry, it is always a last minute push to get capstone projects finished up. And then on that Thursday, we will have graduation. So 9/28, feel free to bookmark that in your calendar. That will be open to the public. You are welcome to invite friends and family. That will be on Lemoyne's campus at the same place that we had kickoff. We'll have cake and all of that good stuff. You'll get your certificates, all of that good stuff. But that is coming down the pipeline. We do have off for Labor Day on 9/4, September 4th. That is our only day off between now and then. You are stuck with me until early September, and then Nathan and Laura come in for the last 2.5 weeks, and then that very final week is the capstone push where you are stuck with me again. Any questions about schedule? Any lingering questions in general?
The information you just gave could be found on Canvas as well.
Can be found on the schedule, and I will put a link in the chat.
Thank you.
We are over, let's see, we are on week 16 of 24. So we are exactly 2/3 of the way done the program. If you didn't think it was fun yet, full stack is what I personally think is the most fun module coming up. So I have been told by graduates that SQL is one of the easier modules. Doug, would you agree with that? What has your experience been with SQL?
So it's not something I retained after we did it, but it is straightforward. It's sort of a new paradigm of all the language. It's a new language. It's a new way of thinking. It's not like HTML. It's not like JavaScript, but it's not as expansive. I mean, maybe it is, but getting the basics was not as, it's approachable.
Yes. It is basically, hey, we just want to store this data, and then we want to be able to get this data back out. How hard can that be? Well, in college, it's a 2-semester course of learning how to design that data, how to properly relate the data together, and then how to query that data back out and insert it and do all of that stuff. We crash that down all into 1 week, but then we keep on practicing using that database knowledge throughout the next 3.5 weeks of full stack. So we also will be using Khan Academy for the SQL lessons, and that normally has had a pretty positive feedback from graduates of the program. So that is coming up. We also have a alumni presentation day coming up on August 16th. We've got 5 different students lined up to come in and talk about their experience after the program, ranging all the way from a student who has published an app on the App Store using React Native, to the importance of kind of putting yourself out there and networking, and making yourself known, to a journey from entry level to junior level to now almost senior level developer, who has worked at 3 different companies, and her experience at each one of those companies has been a different experience, a different learning opportunity. Spoiler alert, one of the companies was my startup. So Caitlin will be coming in for that. We have Mel coming in and talking about kind of project management and how he took everything that he learned and applied it into his job. And we also have Karen coming in and talking about her journey and how she ended up in cybersecurity, what working her first development job was like, all of that kind of stuff. It's totally not because I want to go to a concert that night. It is so you guys can learn from alumni. All right, we are going to flip class from last night. OAR is at the amphitheater, and a couple friends invited me, so I'm going to that. I don't get out much, but I am a huge concert fan. We're gonna flip class from last night because God knows that I can teach on and on and on. So other than images in React, are there any concepts, any things, any struggle points on your capstone? Amberlynn, thank you for volunteering last night and showing off what you had done. That's what we want to be utilizing this week for, right? So we're going to make the first half of class open office hours. We will go through all of those questions. We will work on the Star Wars project tonight, and then tomorrow and Thursday, we will focus in on portfolio and getting practice over there. Taylor said attaching link to a button instead of just linking text. We can definitely cover that. Using other APIs like Google Maps, do you have to npms install something? Yeah, we can go over that as well. Any other questions, throw them in the chat or raise your hand or come off mute. Plush.
For nav bars and say footers, like, do we have to like create components and use outlet on all of them? Because when I tried using that on mine, there's a nav bar and it's sort of like applies as a background, and the main component, say the home component, it looks like it's like another container in that bigger container.
Yeah,
can
so is it nav bar, your main page content, and then the footer down at the bottom?
Yes, yes. So like, do we use outlet for that? Because all right, let me quickly share my screen. Is
Yeah,
that
yeah,
okay?
go for it.
All right. So like, this is my nav bar, but it's like sort of like encompassing, like kind of, it's the umbrella of for this div.
Mhm.
So how do I fix that? I'm
You're
using,
saying you want the background image to like go up to the nav bar section as well?
right, kind of like, why is there like this padding on like right and left, and at the bottom I have to like I have to go in and apply height 100 VH for this this black background div to cover
Let's
the screen.
find out. So this is where you want to lean into your inspect tools.
Gotcha.
And we're gonna just keep on going up here until we find what's happening here. Is it looks like this entire component or this entire div is in your nav bar. I don't know if that was intentional, but if we hover over the nav bar itself, it seems like there is padding left and right coming from navbar.scss.
Gotcha.
Is that something you put on?
Might be. I might have like put like paddings for on the side to kind of push the icon, and not the icon, the logo and the sign in button a little inwards, but it's like now applying to the entire screen. So here's the code if you would like to see.
Yeah, so what I'm guessing is going on is because
But technically,
okay, so here's the problem. Your
Outlet.
outlet is now inside of your nav bar.
Oh, I see.
So what we're going to do is we're going to do what we call a React fragment, which is basically a div without the word div inside of it.
Right.
And then we can take your whole outlet and move it outside the nav bar. And that should fix your problem.
Gotcha. Thank you. Perfect.
No problem.
Yeah, I spent some time on it last evening and I couldn't figure it out. But thank you.
Yeah, using those inspect tools are helpful because you can be like, wait, why is all of my page content inside my div nav bar? It's because that outlet was getting filled with all of that content. Okay, let's go through a couple examples that you guys you requested in the chat. I'm going to go in order. So Taylor has a question about attaching a link to a button instead of just linking the text. We're going to go over using something installed by npm and then touch on the fragment as well. And then if you guys want to just throw things in chat, I'm just going to go from the top to the bottom and help you there. All right, I am going to start in my code. I'm going to do this in the Star Wars code just so that we have something to reference or something to write the code in. I wouldn't advise following along in this part. When we get to the second half of class, we definitely can. So, but if you want to follow along, you totally can. I'm going to go to my day one, to my Star Wars. I'm going to delete my node modules. I'm going to duplicate that as day two. And I'm going to just call this Swappy Playground, just so that we can reference that code and not have to worry about screwing it up for the second half of class. If that makes sense at all. I will start a live share in case you find code easier to read in that. Because I deleted my node modules, I need to do mod npm install. And once that's done, I can do my npm start. That puts us down here. Okay. Before I can link to something, I need to set up a router. And I don't have a router set up in this project yet. So let's go over those steps. First of all, why do we need a router in the first place? React creates something called an SPA, a single page application, or a SPA. That means that we cannot have different pages and be able to link to different things. Well, that kind of seems dumb because what web app have you been on that doesn't have multiple pages? In order to support multiple pages, we need to set up a router. In order to set up a router, we need to install that router. So I come down to my terminal and I hit Control-C, and then I'm going to npm install React router DOM. Now, most front-end frameworks will have a router built into them. For some reason, React doesn't. So we just need to install that in. Once we install it, we go back down and we run our npm start again because we want to not forget to restart it, because if we don't restart it, we're going to get a cannot connect message. Then in our app.js, we need to set up that router. So I'm going to import two things: create browser router and router provider. Then in my either inside at the top of my app or right outside of it, I think the documentation does it right outside, I'm going to say const routes equals create browser router. Doesn't matter what we call this as long as we're consistent calling it that. Create browser router, we do have to call it that because it's coming in from our import up here at the top. And create browser router takes a couple things. It takes an array, not an object. My bad. And then each route it takes as a object. So we're going to say the path is an empty slash. That's going to be our home page. And then we need an element to link it to. The problem is that all of the code that we did last night in our was right in our function app. So it's tempting to take all of this code and just leave it here and put our browser right on top of it. But then we run into an issue of, well, this is going to show up on every single page, no matter what link we're on. So we actually have to take this code and move it into its own component. So to do that, I'm going to right click on SRC. I'm going to go to my new file, and I'm going to call that home.js. Now to make a component, all we do is make a function. We have to make sure it has a capital name. We're going to return some div. Then I'm going to take everything in my app.js and move that into my home.js. So let me split screen here. Hopefully that will make the process go a little quicker. I'm going to take my whole, each one, everything in here, and throw that in my home here. I'm going to take all of my logic around my characters and all of my state and move that over to my home up here. And then we have to be careful because we're using useState, we're using useEffect, we're using a ton of stuff. We also need to come back up here, take our import, and move that over to our home.js. Now, we're tempted to just throw this in here, but that would be a mistake. We want to test every step as we're going, because when we are moving things over, it's tempting to want to move it all over and then work through the errors. But Amberlynn last night showed you why that's dangerous, right? Because you don't know how far off the train is going off the rails. unless you can test it. It's very tempting, very common mistake to make. So instead of going through and finishing out my router, I'm going to comment out the routes, and I'm going to make sure that just my home is working the same way. So I come over here, I refresh the page, and I make sure my home is still working. Now that I know it's working, I can go set up the router. But I want to test as I go, right? And you guys will want to do the same thing. Move component by component over. And if you've got the router set up, great, you can use it. If you don't, just start commenting things out, right? Just saying, hey, I just want my nav bar to show up. Can I get just my nav bar to show up? Great, I'm doing that. Can I get just my homepage content to show up? Is that working? Great, then move on, right? We don't need to move the whole capstone project over at once. You will lead me to drinking if you schedule a one-on-one with me and go, it's all broken, but I moved it all over to React. No, you didn't. You made a mess of it, right? Go step by step, test it as you go. I don't need an excuse to be day drinking during one-on-ones. Okay, so I come over here. Now that I know my home is working, now I can go through and set up the router. So I'm going to comment that back in. I'm going to say my element that should show up at my home page is my home. And then I'm going to set up my router provider to take a router of my routes. I save, I come over, I refresh, and hopefully my home page is still working. Note from, I forget who it was yesterday, make sure that your URL is empty. If you put anything else up here, like just test, you're going to get this unexpected application error 404 not found. All this is saying is you tried to go to a page, you tried to go to a path that doesn't exist. We can fix that as simply as going back or making sure there's nothing after that URL, and that's going to get our homepage to show up. Okay, we've got our homepage showing up. We can go to our source. I'm going to make a new file. I'm going to call this, I'm going to call it character.js, maybe foreshadowing here a little bit of what we're about to set up. In here, I'm going to say my const character is equal to a function that returns out a div. It's got an h1 that says character page. Going to export my default character. I'm going to save on all of that. I'm going to throw a path in here of /character and my element of my character page. And I want to just test that that's working. It's not, because it says character is not defined. That's easy. Import character from my character page. Now, tempting to want to go set up the link, go get your A tag or your link tag working, all of that. Don't do it. Test your routes first. I said /character, so I can come over here and say /character and see I got to my character page. So one, we want to make sure our route is working before we go use it. Okay, now that that is working, I'm going to now set up my link to it. So I'm going to go back to my home. I'm going to come down to here, and I'm just going to throw this in after all the characters just to start. So I'm going to say link to, and whatever I put in this has to match my path here. So I'm not putting in the character in a tag. I'm not putting character.js in, even though that's the name of the file. I'm matching the name of my path. So in my path, I'm going to say link to character. I intentionally forgot a letter there to show you what happens. And I'm going to say go to character page. I save, I come over here, I get link is not defined. Okay. Getting better at those imports. Import link from React Router DOM. Oh, surprised that that worked. Okay, so we got a 404. It was a different error than I was expecting, but that's okay. I make sure I spell my link right. I save, I come back over here. I hit go to character page, I get to my character page. Hopefully none of that is new. The question was, though, how do we make a link work on a button instead of just the text? Well, if I make a button here, and I put my link inside of it, you will notice that this is not a styled button because I'm not using Bootstrap. If you had Bootstrap installed, which I don't think we do, but if you had Bootstrap installed, you could throw a class on it. All of that would be the same. You see, we get a link inside the button. Well, if I kind of go to the edge of that button and click on the button, nothing is happening. I have to specifically been clicking on the text in order to get that to work. So instead, what we do is we take our link tag and we put it around the button. So we put our button inside the link. We save, we come over. I now click on anywhere on my button, even on the very edge, and it takes me to the character page. We did have a question about material icons and fonts and how that works. So just like we install Bootstrap, we go to our material icons. And if we go to, I have to remember how this works. It's in this sidebar, right? So if we hit home, we skip over variable icon, we go down to the static icon font. I can go ahead and copy that tag. And because this is supposed to go into the link tag, this is one of the only 2 times that we should modify the public folder. The second time is coming up in just 1 second. So I go public, I go index.html, and I throw that link right in my head section. Once I have it in there, I am able to take my span and put it inside my button just like I normally would. And when I come over here and look at that button, I should have my little home icon up here. Shannon, doesn't really matter in the head where it goes. Let me just confirm that. Yeah, doesn't matter where in the head it goes. I mean, obviously you don't want to put it in the middle of another link tag, but as long as it's just somewhere in the head, doesn't matter the order. Okay. Button inside the link, did all of that. Let me go back up in the chat here, make sure I'm covering everything. Let me go over fragment, and then I will also go over how to npm install something and get that working. So Shaquata, do you want to go?
Yes. So is that like where you're at an index? Is that the same place that if we wanted to install Bootstrap, we put it in there, right?
Yep. We go get Bootstrap, we go docs, we go get the link,
And then
we
that
copy it, and we
like
paste it.
button if we want it.
What's
Like,
that?
that will help us like if we wanted to get like
Rows and columns or the Bootstrap nav or anything like that working.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And then the font may change a little bit here, but because we now have Bootstrap in, we can do things like on our button, put a class name on that of BTN and BTN primary. And that will make our button look a lot nicer. Okay. Going over the fragment a little bit more. So if I'm in my character page and I'm like, okay, I've got this H1 here, and I want to throw in another div down here that says more content. You'll notice everything goes red. React, weird requirement that it has, but React will not let you return multiple divs. So there are 2 ways of fixing this. You can put everything in one big parent div and make the 2 divs inside of it its own, but sometimes this screws up your CSS depending on what selectors you have. Sometimes putting a div in another div causes some issues. That's kind of an edge case, but for what I call the CSS wizards, for the people who write CSS that is like so magical that it becomes its own level of development. They have complained that they have to put divs in divs when in reality, they just want those two divs to come out. So React fixed this by saying, all right, well, screw your divs, just take out the word div, and that fragment will come out and show both divs, but still be valid HTML. So if we now go look at what this looks like in our browser, you can see we've got our div class app, and it's got the div for the character page and the div for the more content. Well, where did this fragment go? That's just so React knows, hey, I want two divs or whatever to show up without putting it in yet another nested div. So a fragment is a way to return multiple things from a component without having to put them in their own div. If you are confused by that, and this just makes sense to you, just use this. That is totally fine. Just when you get into CSS selectors, sometimes putting things in yet another div isn't a good idea. And that is why React supports something called a fragment, which basically allows you to return multiple things without having them actually render as another thing in the browser. Rain, glad you had that light bulb moment. I wish I could say that you are unique there, but oftentimes people hate JavaScript until they get into React, and then something double triggers and they realize that not only do they like React, but they understand JavaScript more. I don't know why it happens like that. Sometimes it's backwards. Sometimes people hate HTML and love JavaScript, and then they get into React and they like both of them. There's a reason why React is so popular.
I was even able, when I had got that error message that you showed earlier, the 404, I was able to debug why it was happening, and it was because I didn't create the home file. So I'm really proud of myself at this point. And just one other thing, and you can answer it later. With people who speak different languages, is the coding like in Spanish and Cantonese and stuff, or do they just say, hey, I gotta get with the West, and do what they do?
It is a great question. They say music is the universal language, the only universal language. They lie. English is by far the dominant programming language. In fact, when I started my first job, first full-time job, I should say, the developers we had a foreign development team somewhere in Middle East, maybe, or Eastern Europe. I can't remember. Non-native speaking country. And the comments were all written in whatever language they spoke, but the code itself was all written in English. So there are a couple programming languages that are not English dominated, but by far 99% of all programming code that the computer actually executes is written in English.
Thank you. And just let you know, I can now create a React app with separate, like routing separate pages, navigation. I'm just really proud of myself. That's about it. Thank you. Bye.
Nice. All right, let's dive into that a little bit more, and then I will go over a npm install. So we've got our route set up, right? But let's say I want a nav bar to appear on all the pages. Well, in order to make a nav bar work, I can't just throw the nav bar right here. If I put it here, the problem is whenever we include any links in that nav bar, it will be sitting outside of the router. In addition to that, I may not have as much control over where the page content is going to show up if I just throw my nav bar in here. So what we do is we kind of create a layout or a template or a structure or content stuff gets injected in here. Whatever you want to call this component, you can call it anything that you want. So let's call it layout.js. Now in my layout.js, I'm going to call it layout. I'm going to return a div. Inside that div, I am going to put an outlet. And that outlet needs to be imported from my React Router DOM. Now that I've got that imported, I can export it and put my layout in here. Now, what I'm going to do is say, hey, my home page and my character page, I want to always have an H1 at the top that says Swappy. So I save that, come back over here, and I'm going to nest everything in a big path. So my path is going to be, this shows up on every page, and the element that shows up in it is going to be my layout. And then what shows up inside the outlet of the layout are my two paths that I put in there. So how is this working? I've got the word Swappy showing up at the top, and I've got my character page showing up. How is that working? Well, it's going to my layout. No matter what page I'm on, it's going to go to my layout file, and it's going to put this H1 at the top. Then it's going to say, okay, what's the current route? The route is character. So I'm going to go take the character, which is this file over here. I'm going to take those two divs and I'm going to shove them into where this outlet is. Okay, well, why would we want to do that? Well, if we want something like a navbar, I can go create something called navbar.js. I make my function. I export my default navbar. And to just prove a point, I'm going to go to Bootstrap. I'm going to search for the navbar. I'm going to take, I don't know, this one looks like a good one. I'm going to go copy that and paste it in the return here. Now I've got a shitload of classes, so I have to do my find command F, find class equals, and replace it with class name equals. Replace, save. Now over here, I can put my navbar in. And I have to import my navbar. And while we're at it, let's just do a footer.
Max, I have a quick question. So
Shoot.
how, like, say if we wanted to put an image with the nav bar, would we put that right like on the nav bar section, or will we put it in the outlet thing so that it could go on every page?
Hold that thought. I will answer that in 1 second. Okay, so I throw in my footer here. I remember to export. Yes, I did. So I just need to import my footer from footer. All right, I save that. Now I've got my Swappy, I've got my navbar, I've got my page content, and then I have my footer here. That means if I go back to the home page, I'm still going to have my Swappy, I'm still going to have my navbar, I'm still going to have my footer, and then whatever I want on this particular page, I'm going to have inside of this outlet. Maybe putting that there is a little overkill. So the question is, if I want an image to show up, the question is, do you want that on every, do you want that inside your navbar, which is already on every page, or do you want to just put the image in the layout? Well, it depends where you want that image to show up. If you want there to be an image right beneath the nav bar that shows up on every page, you would want to put that in layout. But if you wanted it to show up like where the letters nav bar are, you would want to put it inside that nav bar file. So it's just where it would work in either place. It's just a matter of where you want to put it. So, did that answer your question?
Yep, thank you.
So let's talk about images.
Sorry, wait, can you just explain that one more time? Because like if the nav bar shows up on every page anyways, if you put it in the nav bar, then it would still show up on every page, wouldn't it?
Yes. So basically we're saying, do you want it inside the nav bar? Do you want like a logo to show up inside the nav bar? Or do you want an image to show up underneath your nav bar on every single page? Or above your nav bar, I guess, either one.
Oh, okay, all right, thank you.
So it's basically saying, do you want it to show up like, do you want it to show up underneath it, or do you want it to show up like inside of it? Hopefully that makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so two things I want to touch on. Images, and what if I don't want something to show up on every page? So let's say I'm cruising along here and I'm like, oh, I want a login page, but my login page shouldn't show the nav bar and shouldn't show the footer because that's only for people that are signed in. We can accomplish that by saying, okay, I'm going to make one final new component. Sorry for all the new components. Okay, if I am in my app.js and I put my path login and my element login and import my login, no, my login. I hate how sometimes it works with the imports and sometimes the autocomplete works and it doesn't. If I go to my login page, I'm going to have my nav bar and my footer on it because it's part of this parent layout. But what's kind of cool about the router is I can take this entire object and move it outside of my layout element right here. Nope, sorry, one more step out. Now I have a login page without my nav bar and my footer on it because it's not rendering through the outlet of this layout component. But if I go back to my home page, I still have my nav bar and my footer because it is part of the child that shows in the outlet of my layout. That's a new concept. We haven't really shown that before, but hopefully that makes sense. Okay. I think the only outstanding question, oh, images and then an npm import. Okay, so two ways we can do React images. No, Palash. You would, I actually don't know. Hold on, I have to experiment with that. Palash says if we throw a prop on here, like name of my site is Swappy. And then we go to the layout and we get the name prop. And we like use the name here. We get Swappy showing up. But in order to pass those props to the child, I think you would have to pass it here. but I don't know if that will actually trickle down. No, that does not trickle down to the child. So there isn't a easy way to pass props from the layout through the outlet to the child route here. But instead, what you could do is you could just take that prop and pass it right into the child here, and then you would get access to it.
Will it
here.
work if you do like props.name instead? Like not just props? No? Okay.
Well, you can see it's passing through when I do the name here, it's getting access to it here.
Gotcha.
So there isn't, I don't think, but you wouldn't want to be like, if you had some kind of global state, you would rather that state be inside of your app as opposed to inside the layout.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. I'll just leave that in there. Doesn't matter. Okay. Images. Two different ways that we can do images. I'm going to head to Unsplash. I'll just grab this first image and download it. I'm showing you both ways not to confuse you, but because you will see both ways in real life React world code. So two different ways we can handle images. Unfortunately, the reason why there are two ways of doing it is because no one agrees the best way to handle images. There's actually a third way that we handle images that we won't get into, but some people argue the best way to do images is to put that image in the public folder. So I'm going to grab that image. I'll throw it in my public folder. One is in my public folder. This is the only second time that you should be modifying files in your public folder, other than modifying the head of index.html. Swear to God, if you put your own JavaScript in that index.html because you want vanilla JavaScript to work, I will come over and slap you silly. Do not put vanilla JavaScript in your index.html, no matter what Stack Overflow genius thinks that that's the right way to do it. It is not. There's a more efficient way to do it in React. Okay, sorry. Tangent aside, I'm going to rename this file just so it's easier to work with. I don't know, desert.jpg. When we have it inside the public folder, again, make sure it's inside the public folder. Make sure that when you collapse it, you know it's in there. Once we get it in there, in our home.js, we can just go down and write it image src equals, and we do a slash, and then we just say desert.jpg. And let's throw some style on this with 50 VW, so it's not huge. Now I come over and I get my image showing up. Image goes in public folder. We rename it so it's something helpful. I did drag and drop the JPEG, Corwin, just any way. If you wanted to do it in Finder, you can move that image into the public folder there. If you want to, it's very common to make a folder inside your public folder called image or images. And then in your file path, you would just say img/, and then you'll see that also works. Once the API call loads, that will also work the same way. And that can just help group all of your files together. The other way of doing this, and I don't mean to confuse you, but I want to show you it so that if you're ever taking a React test and they say load an image through an import, you know how to do it. If you want to, you can put the image inside the src folder. You can rename this to whatever you want. And then up at the top, you can import your image from your desert.jpg. Then instead of using your image src, you instead do your image src, and your curly braces line up with whatever you called the import up here. And we'll throw the same style on that, copy, paste it, and that will also show up the image. So 2 different ways of doing it. No one quite agrees on what the best way is, except everyone thinks that there is a better way of doing it. They just don't agree on what that is. If you have multiple images, same thing, Shannon. You would just import it. Maybe instead of calling it IMG, you call it desert and animal 2, animal 3, like whatever you call it in the import up here, you just change the name of it down here to match that. There are pros and cons to both ways. The pro of doing it this way is that when you build your React files, Webpack can have control over basically compiling all the images together, and it can do things that the public folder can't, like compress the images. Some people like the public folder method better because it better supports what we call a CDN, or a content delivery network, where basically it allows you to upload your files to multiple locations. This is considered the more React-y way of doing it, and this is considered more of the traditional DevOps-y way of doing it. It works both ways. I will not tell you which way to use, but I will say that this tends to be the way that causes less headaches down the road, and is easier to understand.
Max,
Yes.
if you have multiple images within that import, can you put the images into a function? Into an object, excuse me, within that one line, or do you have to do import image for each image?
You have to import for each one because this file path is going to be unique for each one of them.
Okay.
Yes, Corwin and Rain, you're both on the same thought process there. If you're going the import route, it cannot be in the public folder. It has to be in the SRC. You can do image folder here if you wanted to, just like you can in the public way of doing it. Then in your file path, you're just going to include IMG and desert.jpg. And that will still have both images work. But if you have multiple images and you're doing the second method, you have to import them for each one. If you are using this method, the images have to be inside the public folder. You can have folders inside of them, and you can go that way. You're not really repeating yourself, Corwin, for those imports because every file path is unique, so it's not repeated. Like I said, I find that from a student perspective, this is the better way to go. This is the easier way to understand. This is the more React-y way of doing it. I guess it's technically a better way of doing it, but I've fought so many battles with having to do it this way and just learned that sometimes this way is easier. Until you are a very senior DevOps and React person, you can't really form an opinion. So whichever way makes more sense to you, just run with that one. That is totally fine. And if someone comes at you for doing it one way or the other, just send them at me and I'll bite their head off. Because I can argue either side of it. Okay.
Matt?
Yes. No, go ahead.
Yeah, so I like as you call it, quote unquote, the React-y way because I'm used to doing that for the homepage and importing other things. But can you just one more time on how you dragged and dropped that way?
Oh yeah, so it's just grabbing the image from wherever it is and just dragging and dropping it into the folder that you want it to go into.
Oh, and then including it with the code.
Yes. Yep. Well, if you're importing it, you have to make sure it's down in the SRC section. And then you just use it like that. But these files are the same way. So like if you just went into Finder and went into SRC, IMG, or made your IMG folder, same thing here. You could just drag and drop it into Finder, and it would also import it over in your sidebar.
Got you. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Other than the NPM install question, are there any other questions that have popped up so far that I have not covered or missed in the chat, or just popped into your head?
I don't want to be the one that keep on speaking, but this is what you're here for.
It is.
Was it the Finder and the terminal are basically the same thing? What was the terminal? The terminal's equivalent to. No, Finder is equivalent to. No, they're not. Okay.
So I'm. You're getting tongue-tied because I'm getting tongue-tied. Terminal uses the same file system that Finder uses, so that when you are in a terminal, you are always in a working directory, meaning you are in some folder somewhere in Finder, which is using the same file system. Terminal isn't the same as Finder, though, because you can execute commands in terminal. You cannot execute commands in Finder.
Correct.
So terminal is using the same file system that Finder is using, but I wouldn't say that it is the same as terminal.
I had a question, and I should have just wrote it down before I just went out and asked you. When I was creating my React app, you know how you do LS, you have to actually find exactly where you want to create in the project at.
Yep.
It's something based on that, but I just should have wrote the question down so it would have made more sense. But I think you're picking up what I'm saying.
Yep. So LS is always going to list. LS is for list. Terminal, to me, like all of these commands, I just like memorized all of them. And then someone was like, you know, those are all acronyms or some like shortened version of what you're trying to do, right? I'm like, what do you mean? LS is for list. PWD is for print working directory. CD is for change directory. Why do they call them directories instead of folders? No idea, but it means the same exact thing. And then CD, and you're going to go somewhere, right? So the biggest thing with terminal, whenever you're executing a command, you're not just executing the command, you're executing the command in your specific working directory. So if I CD to my desktop, then npx create React app here, it is going to create it on my desktop because I CD down to my desktop. PWD doesn't actually do anything for the terminal. It doesn't change where it's at. PWD is just going to print the working directory and tell you, hey, even though you visually can't see it right now, you're actually down in your desktop.
Mm-hmm. As always, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Contact page. Save that thought for tomorrow or Thursday, because we're going to move the portfolio site over starting tomorrow, and that has a contact page on it. So that will hopefully answer some questions that you have about that. Not as different as you think it would be moving it over vanilla to React. Pretty similar in terms of change your class name, make sure the styling is coming over, all of that stuff. If you were going to make an API call based off of what data got typed in, that would be very different in React. But because we haven't really made our own APIs yet, no significant differences moving that over, but we'll see that tomorrow. Okay, last thing. I don't know why this popped into my head, but npmjs.com. Every time you refresh the page, you get maybe they only change it every day. You get a different like slogan up here at the top of just ridiculous things that npm could stand for, but doesn't actually. So today's is nicer package manager. If you refresh this tomorrow, it will be something different. If you click on it, it changes to something different. Nobel Prize magnet. Okay. In our NPM, I am going to do a search for something called React spinners. NPM, very, very large repository, probably borderlining on millions of packages at this point, if not at least hundreds of thousands. React Spinners is a package that I have used for a loading screen. So if I click on React Spinners, it's going to pull up the README. Anything that has like 100,000 or more weekly downloads is a very widely used package, and a package that is probably very safe to use in your own project. You will find that there is usually a command to install it. If there isn't, it will be up here in the top right, and you can just follow that one instead. And then they will also show you the usage of how to import it. They'll show you the import. They will show you how to call the component once you import it. And you can see there are all kinds of documentations and different loaders that are available here. Sometimes there will also be a link to a demo page or to external documentation. Don't be afraid of that. If you click on that to the demo page, you can see these are all like different pre-built loading animated loading icons that have been pre-built as React components. So let's practice using that. I'm going to go back to the NPM page. I'm going to copy this install command. Again, in your terminal, make sure that you aren't just running your server. You cannot just paste the command down here and hit enter. That will not work. So make sure you hit Control-C to stop your server, Command-V to paste the install, wait for the install to finish, then npm start it. I will say that there are some packages that are more involved to install than others. They'll have more imports that you've got to do, or you've got to pull in the styling for it, or follow the documentation. So here, it just says install and then use it. So all I need to do is copy my clip loader, go up to the top and paste that in. Then in my loading screen, instead of, where did it go? Instead of just returning an H1 of loading, I can return a fragment. And inside that, oops, I can put my clip loader. I save, I come over, I refresh, and now I get my little spinny. And when it's done loading, it shows it. And the documentation will show you that there are different properties that we can put in here. We can put in different sizes. We can change the color of it. So this is going to show you whatever props. And sometimes they will even document what props it will take. So this will say it will accept a color hash. It also accepts basic colors listed below, and it accepts all of these. So if we wanted to, we can say something like color equals lime. Back over here and refresh, and now I get a line spinner, and then it shows all the data that I want.
Max, can you just one more time? You said Control-C to stop the server.
Yep.
And then place the install
Yep.
thing for
Click on it here to copy it, Command-V to paste it, enter to install it, and then npm start again to get your web server back up and running.
Okay, thank you.
And if you feel like you are drowning in trying to get something working, but you have no idea what package to use, join the club. I mean, schedule a one-on-one with me. I can go through, share packages that I have used in the past. Our production code base at work, our main production code base, I should say, we've been working on for the past 3 years, and we probably have 40 to 50 NPM packages being used in it. And every project is obviously different. So it is very common to use a package for mapping. lots of different ways of pulling in NPM packages. It will be a similar process to Google Maps. You'll want to look for Google Maps specifically for React. So if you do React Google Maps in a search, you can see there are a couple different options. Keep just two things to look for. One is the popularity over here. So if you open this one, you can see 181,000 weekly downloads. That's a pretty promising sign. But also look at how long ago publish was done on it. This hasn't been updated for 6 years. Something tells me Google has gotten a lot better at doing their mapping application in the past 6 years. So if you go back and look at something else, this has 440,000 weekly downloads and was also updated 6 days ago. So a little bit safer to use something like this than it is to use something that hasn't been updated for 6 years. Sometimes you can, this has 277,000 weekly downloads, was updated 3 months ago. Either one of those would be fine to use. Sometimes you can start with one, spend a couple hours on it. You don't like it, it's not working, go try another one. If that other one works, that's totally fine. Again, you're just looking for something with a lot of weekly downloads that was updated somewhat recently. Those are the two main things to look for now. Down the road, you can get into security issues and licensing and all of that stuff. But for the most part, you're safe installing anything from NPM as long as it's got a fair amount of downloads and is updated recently. But again, if you need help navigating that process, definitely schedule a one-on-one with me or shoot me a Slack message and I can help you out. Any other questions?
I have a question, but it's regarding our week 14 yeet.
Sure.
Actually. Okay, so first things first. Hold on 1 second. Okay. Was number 7 a trick question? Number 7 was, make it so when the page loads, hello world shows in the console. Copy and paste all of page 1. So, originally I did a div, right? But then I thought about it. You use the word load. So I'm like, well, maybe he wants me to use effect.
I do, yes. So the trick question is, we could, in our app, just put like console.log hello world, right?
Yeah, that's what I did originally, yeah.
But if I put that hello world in here, it shows up in the console, but let me put it in a different spot. Let me put it in our home file. So right before the return, I can put it in here. And now whenever I type a letter, my hello world is going to show back up in the console. So to fix that, we just need to throw it in a use effect. And don't forget, this use effect will also run anytime the page reloads unless we put in those brackets.
The empty array, yeah.
Yep. No. Your use effect should be above any if statements if you have them. So now I see my hello world in the console, but as I'm typing things, my hello world doesn't show up, just the original one does.
So that was my second question. So when I used the use effect, right, my hello world kept on showing up in the console twice. Is that normal? And I couldn't debug it.
It is normal. That is due to the local development environment, making sure that we don't have things causing infinite loop in terms of our rendering. You don't need to really worry about it. You should leave it the way it is and have it show up twice. Once you build and deploy that out onto the internet, it will actually only run once. The way to fix it, and I hesitate to show you this, is that you take out this strict mode and you just make it say React. That will prevent the double log, but you actually want strict mode on. Strict mode is making you write essentially better React code, making sure that the React code that you're writing isn't causing infinite re-renders and stuff like that. So it is better to leave strict mode on and then just know that whenever you console log something, it may happen twice on development, and that's okay.
Okay. One other thing I noticed about React is I mean, I know as a junior, I should utilize Prettier, but I don't like Prettier with React. It changes up my code. It adds in semicolons where I don't want them.
So
I just wanted to say that.
So Prettier is what we call an opinionated code formatter. Some code formatters give you a list of like 400 options, and they will let you tweak it, right? And say, oh, well, you think a line should only have 80 characters in it, but I like my lines longer. I think it should have 100 characters in it. And so you can use other code formatters that will allow you to tweak it and go from there. Prettier is not the only code formatter. It is not the be all end all. There are definitely other code formatter options out there. In fact, if you go into VS Code settings and do a search for formatter, you can see while we've got Prettier set to our default code formatter, there are a ton of different other options in here, and you can install other extensions on top of that. As to semicolons, you should either be putting a semicolon every place that Prettier puts a semicolon, or you should not be putting semicolons anywhere. It's considered bad code to use semicolons kind of lazily. Either you want to put them everywhere where JavaScript expects there to be a semicolon, or you shouldn't be using semicolons at all, which JavaScript mostly supports. So it is definitely opinionated. Not everyone uses code formatters. I will say it is a requirement at Tuzag that when you, at our startup, when you submit code into production, we want it run through Prettier so it's uniform. So if I'm reading my code and then I'm reading some other code that someone else wrote, they're not using different levels of indentation. They're not using semicolons in some places and not using it in others. We don't have some code that's really long on one line and then really short lines elsewhere. So it is a standard that we enforce that, hey, whenever you turn in the code, it's got to be run through Prettier. But it is opinionated, and if you don't share the opinion of that, how that code is written, you can turn Prettier off, right? The computer doesn't care how your code is formatted as long as it can read it. That's what matters. So Prettier is more for your fellow humans than it is for the computer itself.
Yeah, I just noticed yesterday when I was using use effect, and you know how you put in the empty array so you can run it once?
Yep.
It kept on messing with that line when I wanted everything, the object, notation, everything to be together. But thank you for the explanation. Yeah.
Amberlynn, can you expound upon awesome things in here? What was I talking about when you asked that question?
I think that was with the NPM menu.
Oh, in React Spinner in particular?
Yeah, I think she was saying what other cool things are in there. She's out right now. She sent me a note. Her kids let the goats out. So
Oh, that sounds like fun. Well, React Spinners is pretty limited. It is just a package for just loading indicators. And if you go to the demo page, you can see like all the different options that you have here, and then you can just pick any one of those if you've got something loading in your project and don't want to build these animations from scratch. You can just go in here and grab one of them. In fact, there's a, can't remember. You can see if you refresh, this is a project that I'm working on the side right now. If you refresh the page, you see that there's like a different loading indicator that shows up every time. So that is, you can pick any one of those loading indicators and pick one of those off. However, in NPM in general, there are thousands of packages, and I have used probably 100 of them in my past 10 years as a JavaScript developer. So it's more about thinking about what pre-built code you want to use and pulling that in, as opposed to like just exploring everything that's available here. I don't even know, like if you do a search for like top 100 NPM packages, here's the top 1,000 most used packages. React, you'll notice, is very high on that list. Express is what we will start learning in 2 weeks after SQL. Express is the node framework that we will be using. React DOM is obviously a part of React. Axios and Request are 2 alternatives to fetch, basically a way to make API calls without using fetch, which is surprisingly built into the browser, but wasn't built into Node until about 4 versions ago. Now we don't have to rely on them as much, but it's a very opinionated thing. Some people like using Request or Axios over the native fetch. I'm not one of those people, but it exists. Webpack is used by React and a ton of other packages to basically bundle up your code. Body parser is something that we'll be using in Express. jQuery, very dated, would not reach for it for any new products, but widely used on the internet. Semver is actually, when you see like we're on React version 18.2.0. Semver is short for semantic versioning, and it means that there's a major number, a minor number, and a patch number. And that is very commonly, you'll see that in iOS and in Apple products. You'll see that kind of all over the place. The reason why there are 3 numbers, they're supposed to be able, if they fix something that is not new but doesn't break an older thing, they change the patch number. If they release new features, but those new features don't break any existing features, they update the minor version. And then if there's a whole slew of new features, and sometimes those features will break older versions of the code, they will change the major version of that. So Semver is just a agreed upon versioning system. Anyway, a ton of things in here. I would not recommend going through the top 10 or even 100 of these packages and being like, oh, I wonder how I can use this. Just search for things on NPM when you need them. Google Maps was a good example. Loading indicators are a good example. I use something called React Select all the time, which is basically a better drop down that allows you to like start typing in letters to filter out some of the options. You can install Bootstrap through NPM instead of doing it through the index.html. All kinds of stuff that you can pull in from NPM and use it that way. Jen, you basically had the answer right. It is the curly braces without the $sign. $, curly braces is for a template literal. In React, it's not, it uses similar syntax to the template literal, but it's just the curly braces.
Hey Max, I have a quick question. Like when we like revisit our capstones in React, so we open that folder in VS Code and then we like delete node modules folder and then npm restart it, or just like
you don't have to delete node modules because you'll only have one. Hopefully, you'll only have one capstone folder. So we only delete node modules when we're like doing day over day changes. But you don't have to delete node modules. You should just take the folder, drag it into VS Code, right click, open in an integrated terminal. Package.json is normally a safe one to right click on, and then npm start, and you should be off to the races.
Thank you.
Only have to npm install when 1, we're installing a new package, or 2, we deleted node modules because we have multiple copies of the code. All right, go on break. think up some questions while you are eating dinner or hydrating or whatever you're doing. 7:25, come on back and we will go from there. Did anyone have questions that popped into their head over the break?
Max.
Yes.
So I was looking at my capstone and I have images in there and I've got them in the public folder. Do I have to go through and change the A tags to link tags?
You will, but that shouldn't prevent the images from working.
Oh, okay, that makes sense because I was like, they're showing up, so okay.
So the A tags you'll want to change so they use React Router. And if you change the A tags to remove the .html, you'll notice they'll still work, but they aren't quite as efficient because basically instead of telling the browser, hey, go load this other HTML page, you're instead, which is what the A tag does, the link tag basically says, no, you already loaded my whole app. You know what this other link is to. Instead of going back out over the internet and reloading in my whole app, just like take this current page away and throw the new page in there instead. And so you'll notice the link tags actually work a little bit quicker and will like switch over to the content immediately instead of what you're used to on the internet, right? Which is when you click on a link and then like it pops in and then the images come in and all of that stuff. You'll notice the link tags work a lot quicker.
All right, thank you.
Yep. Other questions?
Can I borrow $20?
No. Sorry, company policy.
Oh my
Can I borrow $10?
No, sorry, company policy.
Can I buy a vowel?
Sure, if it's guessing API or something like that. We can switch over to capstone questions. If you don't have any questions on your capstone, I will sit here quietly for the next hour and wait for you to have questions on your capstone and force you all to work on your capstones in the next hour. Or you can ask any questions or ask about like how we would implement any features in the Star Wars project. We'll save the portfolio project for tomorrow because starting a project from scratch at 7:30 just seems like a very bad idea. So we will save React portfolio for tomorrow. But any questions of, hey, how would you do this in React, or how would you implement this in like the Star Wars project? We can go over that. Otherwise, we will switch to our capstones and have you guys work on that and just shout out questions as they pop up. Jen, you had a question on props. Props are basically just a way to pass information from a parent component into a child component. So let's say in our, let's do it like this. Let's say in our app, we've got some information up here that we want to pass down into the child. So let's say I do something like, hey, character is called Han Solo. And I would like that to show up inside my character component. I'm going to say the name is character. So it's going to take character, it's going to go up here, it's going to see that that's Han Solo, and it's going to pass that down into the character here. That means that in our character here, we can access props two ways. We can either put the word props up here and then say character page props.name. The name here is pulling from props, props is pulling from here. Props is getting the information from here, which is referencing character. Character is going up here, getting Han Solo. That means that when we go to our character page, we see Han Solo here. The other way we can make that work is we can, instead of putting the word props here, we can put curly braces and put name, then access that name directly, and then we still get Han Solo over here. The reason that we need props in the first place is what happens if we have like multiple character pages, right? What if we say we want a character page to show up for Han Solo? We also want a character page to show up for Darth Vader. And we also want that to show up for Princess Leia. Well, now on our homepage, we see character page for Han Solo, character page for Darth Vader, character page for Princess Leia. So it's basically a way to pass that information at the parent level where we're calling it down into the child level, so that when we call it down here, the information coming in from the props will be unique for whatever information we're passing into it. The other place that we will see props used frequently is if we say something like const characters is equal to Luke, Leia, and Darth Vader. We can come down here, and instead of repeating ourselves 3 times, we can go to our characters, map over them to get each individual name, then return out the character where the name is getting passed in from the name right here. Because we're mapping, we also have to put a key on that. And then we will see our names, even though we only did called character once, because we're mapping over them, we're going to get Luke, Leia, and Darth Vader. And then when we come over here, we see Luke, Leia, and Darth Vader. Yes, but that's the 15-minute question. So Taylor's question is, I'm just going to comment this out so we don't have random characters showing up. Can we make it so on our homepage, when we click on one of their names, we go to that specific character page with more of their information? We can do that. Let me just quickly look at the Swappy API, and it looks like it's done by person number. So what we do is we use a route parameter. We say character, and then we need to know what number that character is. So we're going to pass in an ID for that. Then on the home page, we're going to modify our LIs to instead return a link to, and we're going to link to /character/ and then whatever ID of the character we're on. So character name gets generated. We pull the index out from the map as we're going over each one of them. And actually, this is going to be a little confusing. We need ID +1, because if you notice, out of the people, even though Luke is the first one, he's actually people number 1. So the database that Star Wars uses is not 0 indexed, but when we pull the data into the array, it is. So we just have to account for that and say, all right, it's just the first one we're looking for. Okay, so now we've got all of these links here. So when we click on it, you'll see we get to the character page, and this number 7 is hanging out up in the URL. Did I lose anyone so far? Okay, so on our character page, we can do something called use params, which is coming in from the router. That's going to give us our ID. From there, we can use an effect because we only want this code to run when the ID in the URL has changed. From there, we can go back to our home page and borrow our entire make API call. And instead of setting characters, we're just going to set character. And I actually need to take a look at this. So we're going to pass in whatever ID came from our router. And then we are going to console log out the data and see what comes back. And the information we're looking for is all right here. So data, we're showing it to the user. We've got to set that into the character information. The character information needs to be stored in state. So we need to say character and set character is a use state. And if there is not a character, then return out a loading bar loader. Conveniently coming from our React spinners, we already installed React spinners somewhere else in the project, so we don't need to reinstall it for this page. And then finally, we can say something like character.name and import our use state. And just like that, we get whoever we clicked on. And if we go back to our home page and click on R2D2, we get R2D2 here. And then we could even build out things like species, URL, vehicles. Okay, so let's just do something like birth year is coming from our character dot birth year. And I don't know, eye color. Oh, come on. R2D2 has red eyes. Get out of here. You go back. Our API is not the fastest. And we pick C3PO and we get that information.
Matt,
Yes.
for the change of the use state, what are I noticed you use F. What are some other ways we can initiate the change? Like you probably, and I know you went over this, but like could we utilize then and other statements? Like what are some things to initiate the change, the later change of the use state is what I'm asking. And I know I should be using keywords right now.
Yeah,
like,
I'm not sure I understand your question.
let me Google the
Okay.
proper terminology and I will re-ask later.
Go for it. That's a good plan. So like we could do something here if we wanted to, like if we wanted to use more if statements, we could say like if the character's name is equal to R2D2, then instead of returning the character's name and birth year and color, we're going to return an image with a source of, and I'm just going to go find an R2D2 image. Never go out on the internet and just steal someone else's picture because you don't have copyright for it. But in the classroom, we are, my God, that's a long URL. Oh, no, that's not what I'm meant to do. In the classroom, we are covered under fair use, but on your actual project, we probably wouldn't be. So don't steal images unless you have the copyrights to them. Oh, come on. There we go. All right, that now turned into a terrible example because I couldn't get a stupid image to show up. But you can see here, we're checking if a character doesn't exist, show the loading indicator. For some reason, if we were like, oh, R2D2 is special, we don't want to see his name, we want to see a picture of him instead. Now, when we go to C3PO's page, we're going to see, you know, what shows up down here. But if we go to R2D2 and make sure I put a dash in his name, now when we go to R2D2's page, we're going to not see an image because this is dumb. Why did my link not work? There we go. So I'm not sure, did that answer your question, Rain, or were you trying to ask something else?
Sorry about that. Okay. Sort of, but I know that I'm trying to ask something else. For the change within the use state
Mm-hmm.
and the if statement, what are other ways we can initiate the later change? I want to use the proper terminology when asking you this, so I'm like looking at Google right now.
So down here, we're just using that data that we're putting in the use state is just an object. So that object can be used anywhere in the component. So down here, we're using name, birth year, eye color, because those are all data properties inside the object. So in this case, we're using it to display information. We could also use it like this has an array of the films that R2D2 is in. So we could also do something like, hey, go to the character, go get their films and map over each film. And then for each film, return a list item. That's going to be a anchor tag that uses an href of that film.
My question on what it could contain in the objects. But I was more targeting like, could I say then instead of use a then statement rather than if statement to return?
What is a then statement?
I know, see, I'm not using the proper terminology. So
you can use you could use an else if or a else.
That's what I'm asking. Yeah.
So here you could say else if the character's name is C3PO. Let me just make sure he doesn't have any dashes or stuff in his name. Then return an H1 that has the style of a color of yellow that says C3PO. Letter O and then C-3P. And then you could do an else here and say return H1 different character.
Okay, so usually to return the objects is going to be if, or else when using use state.
Not necessarily. We could, I mean, you want to have a use case to show that the data that is in the use state is loading, but it is entirely possible to skip all of this and say, hey, handle the loading case, and after the loading case, if the character is loaded in, always return this information down here.
So it could be a regular return. Got you. Okay.
Yep.
I'm just trying to write down my notes and stuff. Thank you for trying to understand me. Thank you.
This return, whenever we hit a return, and this is true in regular JavaScript too, it's not just in React. Whenever we hit a return, it will automatically stop running anything beneath that function. So that return is essentially acting as the stopper of this. this return at the bottom won't run if this is true. So this is saying show the loader, don't show any of the information down here. But if the character information is loaded in, we could do additional if statements to say, show this if this is the case, show this if this is the case. Or more commonly, we would just have a return down at the bottom that's showing all of the information that we want that's being extracted out of the state.
So the return on a use state.
It's not a return on a use state. It is a return on the component we're
We have to-
returning.
The day we
from the
learned
character.
state, I was absent. So like I understand use effect, but I'm still trying to grasp around use state. And it's taking a lot for me to be honest about this right now.
Okay, so use state, let's clear that up. Sometimes it's more helpful to get the React definition. Other times it's more helpful to get the max definition. So state lets a component remember information like user input. For example, a form component can use state to store the input value, while an image gallery component can use state to store the selected image index. Let me see if there's a better. Okay, this is a better definition. Sorry, this is what I was looking for. Components often need to change what's on the screen as a result of interaction. Typing in the form should update the input form. Clicking next on an image carousel should change which image is being displayed. And clicking buy on a product in a clicking buy should put a product in a shopping cart. Components need to remember things. The current input value, the current image, the shopping cart. In React, this kind of component-specific memory is called state. In other words, in our example, we need to keep track of information that we want to display to the user. In this case, we are getting information from an API and we want to display that to the user. So we use state to say, hey, once you get this data, data is just an object, it's just JavaScript, but we want to display that to the end user. So we take this data and we set it into state. Now that it is in state, why do we need state? Why can't we just use a regular variable? Because state is special. Whenever we set the state, whenever we update the state, the return function will come down here, realize that the character information has loaded in, and automatically re-render this information. So if we didn't use state, this information would not automatically update on the page. Think back to vanilla HTML. In vanilla HTML, whenever we had new data, like on movie seats, we could go update all of that data, but it wouldn't just show up in our HTML, right? We had to do inner HTML, we had to regenerate it, it was a whole pain. In React, if that data is coming from state, which is harder to work with because we have to set it, but once we do set it, React is smart enough to react to the change of the information, the state of the information, and go show those updated changes.
So just to clarify, I have been using use state, but I just needed a better grasp on it within React. So my understanding of use state is information that will later change or be re-rendered.
Yes.
Okay, I think I got it. I got it. I'm good on it now. Thank you.
State is a unique concept to React. I hesitated to say that because there are other frameworks that use state as well. But the general notion of state is yes, you are correct in your definition. Information that will change down the road that we want to trigger a re-render of our HTML to show the information that's coming from state. So you are correct there. It is also kind of like, you can think of it as somewhere between short-term memory and long-term memory, right? If you close the page and come back to it, the state will be wiped out. But as long as you have that page open, the state is going to be retained in there. So it's just like a JavaScript variable, except that it is, because it is getting displayed to the user, whenever we update it, it will re-update that HTML.
Got you. And what I've been trying to do is before I ask you a question on something I don't understand, I try to find the information. So when I come back to you, I can say, hey, I tried this, this, and this. I don't got it. I don't understand. But when I was going on React, it was telling me stuff about like then period state and all this extra stuff. I probably wasn't looking it up correctly because you have to be specific, like when you Google. And that's why I wasn't grasping it, but I have been utilizing it, just to let you know.
Cool.
Okay. All right, cool.
And it's also possible to go overboard with state and be like, I'm going to put everything in state. Like, why don't we put response in state? Why don't we put I don't know. I don't have a really good example for this. Well, we aren't using the response directly to show that information. We got to deal with this response. So response isn't in state. It's just a regular variable. Then we parse out the JSON and we take the data. Now the data technically isn't in state yet either. Data is just a variable that's holding the data. When it does become state is when we call this set function that's coming from our use state. Once we pass that data into the set, now our character is holding the information in state from our data that we just set. And because of that, that's going to come down, that's going to trigger this re-render, that's what's going to make the information show up here.
And I'll also make sure I go over my my vocab words as well. Thank you.
Yep. And Mel did a update of the terms list for React that should be in Canvas. I can grab that link as well and dump it in chat. There's a whole React section in there. Other questions, other features that you would like to see how we implement it in React? Any questions on your capstone?
I have a question.
Shoot.
Like, how would we take the image that you did for the R2? I don't know anything about Star Wars, so you took it off the screen. But the image that you took for that, how could we transform that into more like an animation, like where it would be like kind of like flashing or blinking or something? More animated looking. Or how do we do like an animation? It doesn't have to be that image specifically, but
Yeah, no. It's a fair question. So I'm not gonna lie, CSS animations are not my specialty, but they are something we can tackle together. So you can do something, let's say CSS. Well, I'm actually going to show you two ways of doing it. I take it back. There is a really cool library called animate.css. This is my total cheater answer for building it from scratch. But you can see that there are all kinds of things that are built in here. And so if you just like click on one of them, it will like show you what that animation is. And then if you can be like, oh, I want a little wobble in there, you can do that. They've got things for like entrances and also things for exits. And then there are things like fade in. So in order to use this, you can install it with npm. So we are going to do that. I'm going to copy my install. I'm going to come down to my terminal, Control-C, and paste in my install command. I'm going to npm start. And we can't just start using the classes. We have to import our animate.css first. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to do this all the way up at the app. If I do it all the way up in the app, it will apply to every component and I'll be able to use it anywhere that I want. So I can do that all the way up here. And then finally, it says all I need to do is add in a class. Now I have to be careful here because it's class, not class name. So if I copy that, go back over to my character page and paste that in, I'm going to change my class to a class name. And now that I've done that, I get a little bouncing R2D2. And I can come in here and say, oh, I'm going to look at any of the animation names over in here. So if I want a little Jello instead, I'm going to change my bounce to my Jello. And now I get a little Jello-y R2D2. Or, I don't know. Pulse is kind of boring. Well, that's going to be obvious. So I can do a flash. And when I save that, I get R2D2 flashing. And there's all kinds of things in animate.css that you can control down here. So it tells you how to adjust the animation duration. And then there are also things like you can delay the animation. So it will only load on a 2-second delay, or you can speed it up. You can also make it repeat. So you can say animate infinite, throw that on there as well, and then R2D2 will continually flash at you. So there's all kinds of cool things that you can do with animate CSS in there. And yes, this R2D2 is transparent. You can see if I drag the image, he's transparent behind him. Did I just assign a gender to R2D2 accidentally? Sorry. They. I don't know what R2D2's pronoun is, sorry. But whatever, the image is actually transparent because I used a PNG where I'm sourcing that transparency. So that's why the animation is not like blocking out other parts of the website. So that is definitely something to be on the lookout for. Just depends on what animation you're working with.
Thank you. That's cool. I thought it was going to be a little more in depth.
There is a way to do it with straight up CSS, but it is very very involved and very like you have to do specific keyframes and then adjust the properties as you're going there. So if you wanted to like slide in, you have to get into CSS positioning and all kinds of stuff there. I can't say I've ever needed an animation outside of animate.css, except for maybe there's one other framework I've used for like typing in stuff. So it looks like every letter is getting typed in like once the page loads. I have used a different animation framework for that. But these are quite involved to get these animations to work the way they do, because you got to think more like an animator than you do as a developer. So I really like using this framework for that. But you can also use CSS animations in React, just like you would use CSS animations in straight up HTML, and they would also work. Good question. Sorry, I had to dodge a bullet there by pulling in another framework, and also show how we can NPM stuff. Oh, okay. According to the official Star Wars fandom, the pronouns are he, him of R2D2, in case you were ever wondering. I have not used Framer before, Amberlyn, but I have heard of it. There have been things that have existed like this since the beginning of web development. It dates all the way back to a WYSIWYG, which is what you see is what you get. This goes back to some of the first ones I used. There was a product called MS Front Page, and it was like built into the Microsoft Office suite, and it was around the same thing. The only thing that you have to watch with some of the tools is they produce very functional code, but code that isn't necessarily easy to read or easy to maintain long-term as a developer if you ever want to take it outside of that tool. They have gotten better over the years. They still aren't perfect. Squarespace, Wix, all of those along the same lines. Framer may be a little bit better in producing cleaner code because it's more like developer oriented. But I would say that if it is a tool that you get familiar with and you like the output of it, there's no reason why you shouldn't use it. Just check the code and make sure you understand the code that it is producing. Sometimes it is easier to build something in there and then knowing the answer to the HTML and work your way backwards. But I would just say, make sure that you look at the output of it and make sure that you understand it. Other questions? Anyone want to share their screen and get some help on their capstone?
Can I get help like getting data from TMDB API?
Sure.
Okay. All right.
So if anyone else is using a third-party API, they're pulling in data from somewhere else, listen up because you're going to see some stuff on the screen of how to do that.
Do you see my screen?
I do.
So it does have my API key and all that in there. I don't think should it not be on YouTube?
The whole thing isn't exposed, so it's okay for now. You could always reset your API key after class before this gets posted. There's a way to like invalidate it and then just generate a new one. So it's fine for now.
Okay, perfect. So what I'm intending to do is there's going to be this review movies page. This is going to have all the genres of movies that's going to be pulled from the API. And as soon as you select one, probably is going to append a query string, and and then pull those API, like the JSON file relevant to it. So I'm not sure if that's how it's going to work, or is it like it's going to give me a list of movies, popular movies in bulk, and then I sort through it. I mean, I know what to do, but I'm having trouble like going through the documentation. Like, how does it work?
So these popular movies are sorted by genre IDs.
Okay.
What we can't do is in the query parameters say we're specifically looking for popular movies with the genre ID of this.
Okay.
So this is just going to return out however many results are in here of all those genres.
Okay.
What
can I like it cannot have like a popularity query param either, right? No.
Well,
so
let's look at see, this is the same thing with the top rated of it doesn't give us like a filter option,
right?
To say, hey, let's give us that.
Like even if it gives me a JSON of all of popular movies sorted by genres or like categorized by genres, that would do the trick.
Okay, yeah, so let's start there. Is your code hiding right here? Yes. Okay, so we're on review movies. What we're gonna first do is let's just get the data in the first place. So we're gonna say on change, make API call.
Right.
Then we are going to const make API call. And you a promise guy or you an async await guy?
I switched over, so I'm an async guy now.
Thank the Lord. I mean, oh, okay. God, I hate promises so much. then we're gonna do our const response is going to, await our fetch.
Mhm.
And then we are going to fetch our popular.
Okay.
And then we also need to pass in some of the information here.
Yeah, that
So,
authorization. Yeah.
here we do our headers.
Mhm.
And we say the
Copy paste it.
yeah, you know what? Let me just resume. Okay. Fetch. This should go up here. And why is it still mad at me? Headers. Oh, I need one more closing. There we go. Okay. Then we're going to get our JSON from the response from awaiting the response.json.
Mhm.
And then we are going to console log out the JSON. And that is going to be in our terminal here. And then keep in mind, we attach that to the on change. So we won't get anything back until we click on one of them. And then we have our results chilling over here.
Right.
So from here, there are things like the original title in there. So we are going to say, now we haven't solved for the genre specific portion of it, but we can take our movies and our set movies and tie that to state. Then we can make that an empty array to get started and set our movies to our JSON.results. Then after our select, we can do a div and map our movies, which gives us a movie. And I'm sure you'll want to play around with the formatting here, but for now, we'll just throw them in a div. Return, and then say use the movie dot original title.
How about we do images? Does it have images then?
Title, good question. Let's get the title showing first, and then we'll do images next. Okay, so I just pick one. I get my movies, and then inside here, it has the poster path, but you notice it's just an empty slash. That means we're gonna have to use the documentation to figure out like what the first part of that is.
I see.
And that should be usually
Like up here, maybe.
let me just see if they should have it in this documentation. Let me see if they put it in the getting started image API, collections, images,
Yes.
movies, images. Let's just see. Boo.
Finding it.
No, there's something about do this. In the guides, how to build an image URL. Here we go.
Awesome. So just
Um,
add that image.tmdb/t/p.
Yep. And then it looks like there are, you can do like a width of 500 and it will give you that information. So we'll just take the original size of it. And what we will do is in our map, we can return out the img src and use a template literal and include the movie dot, and then I have to look at the data path. And
Poster path, I think. Poster path. Poster.
Poster.
Yeah.
Help if I could spell poster. And then we just close out our image tag.
.jpeg.
No, it's included in the string.
You're right.
So we get a giant image, and then we can always go in and just, you know, style
Right.
width on that of like 300, and that should shrink them down.
Cool. Look at that. Yeah. So, yeah, the only thing I need to set up is the genre wise. So is it like, should I aim for a different API then? Or should I, because it's not gonna be taking any, or should I like have a bulk data imported and then sort them using their popularity because it has a popularity score of like 4,000 or something?
Give me a little bit of time to play around with their API. They're
Okay.
usually pretty flexible. Like what you might end up doing is, instead of using the popular endpoint, because it doesn't have the genre sort, what you could end up doing is like using their search API instead.
Yes, that's what I was thinking. Search or find, and there's a third one. So like if it gives you like a list of movies through genres. Am I sharing my screen right now?
Yeah, you are.
Okay, so there is this here, like in this under genres, it gives you a movie list. And when you go over,
Well, that's just going to give you the list of genres.
IDs, but you can use it to get them back. Oh, you're right. But,
So
but I can like
that
put all
is-
these IDs in an array and then kind of map over and filter them out. The bigger
you could. I'm just worried that you're not going to get as many movies as you want. I did notice the popular has multiple pages, so you could deal with you could get multiple pages and then write basically an algorithm that says get the first 100 pages and keep going until you have 10 movies in each genre that you're looking for.
Okay. Popular, yeah.
That is unfortunately quite involved.
Yeah. Is it not like something like that NYT bestseller API that kind of just gives you what you want? Kind of like 10 movies, any genre.
You could definitely look at a different API. You could look for top 100 movies of all time by genre.
Yes. Does IMDb have an API?
They do not. And if they do, it is there's definitely a reason why I use TMDB at work than IMDb. I think IMDb does have, oh, there you go. The official API costs $150,000.
Okay.
So yeah, you've got a couple options. You could keep digging in IMDb and try and find an endpoint that works for you. You could do some kind of get the popular movies, get 10 pages worth, and then filter it down from there and pull out the genre information from there. Or the other option is you could just build your own database of movies and kind of source it from whatever website that you wanted, and then build out your own database, which is something that you're going to be able to start playing around with next week.
Gotcha.
Which probably isn't a terrible option, because you're saying, all right, if I'm going to cover 10 different genres and I want to only show 10 movies each, that's only
Right.
100 movies I need to load into my database.
True.
That's probably not terrible to think about.
Okay.
So I'm going to let you take over from here. I would probably be leaning towards the hard coding route, but that's something that you can decide down the road.
By hard coding, you mean like, okay, get them like download them using JSON and then put them in a JSON file and then use it locally?
Yeah, we're gonna or just loading the database you'll be able to load up kind of as like an Excel spreadsheet.
Right.
So that you could just load it up and say, hey, here are the genres of this movie. And then you know, just load in 100 different movies and just do it from there.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Corwin, API data is, some APIs are free, some APIs are very expensive. Weather APIs are like a multi-million-dollar industry. So it just depends on where they're sourcing the data from, and they are the owners of the data, so they may choose to not to have an API, or they may choose to charge for it. There are cheaper APIs for weather, and there are a couple free ones as well. So if anyone wanted to use weather data, do not panic. There are cheaper weather APIs. It gets expensive when you get into forecasting and then also historical data. So if you're like, oh, I need to know the temperature in 1912 in Syracuse, New York, sometimes that can get expensive as well.
Does Spotify charge something too? Because I've heard like they have the best APIs, like easiest to use for developers.
They have a very good API. They don't charge, but they have well, they don't charge for the APIs that I have used. You do sometimes have to connect in using a paid Spotify account, and connecting to an API using a user level account uses an authentication flow called OAuth. And OAuth flows, while not impossible to set up, are pretty hard compared to like an API key, which is what you've seen from TMDB and New York Times and stuff like that. So OAuth flows are very common, a little bit harder to set up. And I believe the Spotify API uses a combination of the two. So if you're a developer, you can get access to non-specific user data like top 100 pop songs right now. But if you wanted to say like, hey, go get me all the pop songs in my user account, that's when it would require OAuth.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yes, if you are using an app where you want to link to a specific user account, 9 times out of 10, that would be using an OAuth user account flow. All right, 10 minutes left. It's 10 minutes to work on your capstone unless other people get questions for me and I keep talking.
I got a question. Do we incorporate sounds like how we do like the images and the videos and everything else?
Yep, you can do
Okay.
a audio tag, and it is no different in React than it is in vanilla HTML. In JavaScript, the only difference is your MP3 files, like your images, should go into the public folder. Or you could put it in the source folder and import it just like you can import it with images. But yes, you can use it just like video or image.
Okay, thanks.
It's actually closer to video than it is to image, because video is like you do the video tag and then you have multiple like source file types. So that is what you do for audio.
That's a great question, Tara. Is there like a website where we can get actual audio? Because when my world pops up on my capstone, I was thinking like a Netflix kind of sound, but I don't want to get sued. You know what I mean?
I don't have any go-to like royalty-free audio databases. I
Right.
know YouTube has one. I don't know if they let you just like download from it. But if you just do a search for royalty-free, you should be able to find like a sound effects library or a music library.
And it doesn't matter if it's like MP4 or like different audio types or anything like that with React.
Not with React. Different browsers support different audio types. All browsers will support an MP3 audio type. So I would just use an MP3. You get into dicey area of like having multiple video formats and supporting, or multiple audio formats and supporting them. But I would just say, for the sake of simplicity, if it's not an MP3, convert it to an MP3 and then just use that in your code.
Sounds great.
So if we incorporate like a sound effect and they want to turn off the sound, we could just add in a button for the little icon and then use like how we would do other things.
Yep.
Well, I guess it's gonna be 7 minutes of death. Oh wait, I'm not on mute. Oh crap.
I just have one thing. It's not really, I don't think I have to pull my capstone up for this, but so I don't think there's a specific way to get like an API that holds all like the books that the students can use for the school. But I did find out that they have like an online directory.
Okay.
So I was thinking maybe just have a link there, and then the kids can use that to get access with like their SESD logins. And then the main thing for the website, what I can do is just have it be interactive in the sense that teachers can look at their reports and then students can upload their reports. But as far as like the actual reading the books, they probably will have to do that off of the website, but
Yeah.
they'll be able to still use it for
So there
functionality.
are a couple ways we can go about doing that. I would say focus on like what's your core functionality. So if you were looking at that directory and you're like, wow, this really sucks, like I want a better interface around this, this is what I think is like the most important part of it, we could find a way to get that data and do a process called scraping it, where we take the information from the website and store it in our own database. There is some legality around that. It's kind of like a gray area of the law. It's not explicitly illegal, and if you have permission from the website owner, it's totally legal. That's one option. The other way to think about it is, hey, if that website is already functional and I can just link to it, maybe I should focus on more on the report aspect of it, right? And there's plenty of functionality to build out there. So I would say focus on your user experience of, without making this functional, without submitting the data, without having the report information in the database, can I kind of feel how it would work in my UI? And that's where you want to narrow into.
Okay. Sorry, I was just typing and I wasn't muted.
Oh, you're fine.
Hey Max, you wanna know what I was doing to screw up the props?
Sure.
I was putting it under the element instead of in it.
That will do it.
So I found a way in their forum. So it's like you pull the genre list and then use, I don't know, and with underscore genres to like pull the particular genre. I'm gonna give it a try and report back.
If that doesn't work, go look at their Discover endpoint. Their Discover endpoint does exactly what you're looking for and supports the props in their documentation.
Discover endpoint. Awesome.
So you're still going to have to use the genres endpoint list to decode what the genre IDs are.
Mhm.
But you can basically put the ID in the value of your dropdown and then
Yeah.
use whatever value they select in the Discover endpoint to pass that as a param when you call the API.
As a query param, like in the.
Yes.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
The query param for Discover supports with genres, and then you pass in the ID of the genre.
Cool. Thanks.
Yep. Yeah, the cool thing about the movie database is they treat their data like an actual database, and then like all of the interface was built around it, compared to a lot of websites that are like, oh, if you want our data, you can go through the API, but our website is like our main product. So TMDB is pretty cool. They have a shitload of APIs, but once you find out the way it's structured and learn more about the databases, you kind of figure out why they've got the endpoint structured the way they do.
Yep.
Two-minute warning. Be damned if I let you go early 2 days in a row. Don't get used to this, by the way. On Monday, we dive back into 3 hours of all new concepts. If you got questions, you got to schedule a one-on-one. I mean, if you have questions about the content we're learning, you can obviously ask them, but tomorrow we are diving into our portfolio project. It is our last React project that we are starting from scratch, except for full stack projects, because we will be certainly using React in our full stack projects.
I do have a question about that. So I ended up tweaking like my portfolio project without any React.
Mhm.
So like all the pages are functional and stuff. The only thing it doesn't have are my GitHub links because I still have to go back and just do that stuff.
Yep.
But so
You
like
are welcome to keep that. You don't have to use what we're doing in class and like move everything over. We're just using that as an example project. But we will be going back to the React project we start tomorrow and starting to layer in like full stack pieces of it. So you definitely don't need to move yours over. I would encourage everyone to follow along with it just because we're going to use it down the road. But it is not a requirement. We're not going to like not give you your certificate if your portfolio website isn't in React or anything.
no, but like what I was saying was like can I use mine? Is there a way to like use mine instead of, are we going back to the ones that we made in class and then going from there?
Yep.
Okay. I'll probably just try to find a way to like use mine. That way I can follow along that way.
Totally fine. All right. I'm officially now letting you go late instead of early. Have a good evening, and I will see y'all tomorrow.